Hello, everyone. This is Marty Cook. I'm here to welcome you back to yet another in our series of virtual wine tasting events sponsored by the Pennsylvania Wine Tasting, I'm sorry, the Pennsylvania Wine Society. And today we are featuring Mazza Wines from the Lake Erie AVA up in the northwestern part of Pennsylvania. We will be chatting today with Mario Mazza, who is the Vice President, General Manager, and Head Winemaker at Mazza Wines. So he has a number of hats to wear. And Blaine Ballard, his brand manager, who will be hopping in to fill us in with other details that Mario may overlook mentioning. So without further ado, and oh, by the way, if everybody would keep their mics on mute until the end of the program, at which point we are going to have a period of open mic when you can chat with Mario directly and ask him whatever you'd like to ask. It's quite a story. If I know all of you really have enjoyed past events where we've had stories to tell about the history of the winery and the people behind them. And the Mazza story is quite interesting. So without any further ado, why don't you go ahead, Mario, and unmute your mic, and Blaine, unmute yours as well, and let's tell everybody about Mazza Wines.
Fantastic. Thanks, Marty. And thanks everybody for joining us. Really appreciate you taking time out and looking forward to taking you through. I guess I should just mention, I do have the chat window up. So if I understood from Marty correctly, what we'll do is kind of wait for an open mic session at the end. But if there's questions along the way, feel free to type them into the chat. I'll pay attention to those, and I can, I always like to keep it a little interactive and try to embellish on any points that people find, interesting, and otherwise throw up the tomato emoji and I'll move on.
And Mario, we already have somebody in the chat asking about the tasting order. I apologize for not giving that. We're going to start with the sparkling wine today, then move to the Gruner Veltliner, and then finally we'll end with the Cabernet Franc.
Yep, that's spot on. So I'll bring up some tasty notes in a minute, and we'll kind of intersperse those through kind of a little bit of a background and just a little history talking about Mazza, the Pennsylvania industry as well. So we like to say great taste runs in the family. Talking a little bit about the Mazza story, it bridges beyond, wine. It actually encompasses spirits and beer as well. Of course, we're here to talk about the wine side of that today, but I'll weave in a little bit more about our story as we go. Got just a little video for everyone to start off that just gives a little bit of an intro, and we'll build on from there. So hopefully you should all be able to hear as well.
We are the Mazza family. We have made our home and our wines in Lake Erie wine country for more than 40 years. But like all family trees, we've branched out. Now, those blending techniques that we've invented, honed, and perfected in our wines can be found in some new bottles. Look for all of them in local grocery stores, bars, and restaurants, and at our 5 area locations throughout Lake Erie wine country. Mazza, great taste runs in the family.
And the test always is hopefully the audio worked for everyone. But to give a little sense about Mazza, I'd like to start just giving a sense. We're actually very excited because we're approaching half a century, 50 years it will be next year for us, being established in 1972. And this is just a little bit of an infographic to just give us a sense, and it gives us a sense actually ourselves, a little bit of how far we've come from when my father and my uncle started the business in the early 70s when they were in their early 20s. Our first vintage, we produced 25,000 gallons. As my father likes to remind me, it took us quite a long time to actually be able to sell that much wine. But in 2018, we encroached and actually just recently last year eclipsed 400,000 gallons production of That's wine, our own brands, bulk juice, bulk wine for other brands as well, just across all of our portfolio. So we've grown into the Pennsylvania's largest operation, single operation, with now over 90 employees, and drawing from really interesting up to close to 600 acres now of agricultural land, predominantly in the Lake Erie region here. So most of our vineyards are our grower partners are here along Lake Erie. We work with other growers in other parts of Pennsylvania, central and some in the southeast in the past as well. We have some other growers in other parts of New York, because we do have a sister winery operation in New York as well. But the vast majority of our fruit and our grower relationships are here along Lake Erie. Just continue to grow what we've been able to do along very much the same story of what the Pennsylvania industry has done over the years. So tasting order, actually, Marty, you already covered this, and I apologize. That's actually the 2018 Cab Franc that we're pouring. So the South Shore Wine Company is a brand of ours. So we've got the Sparkling Riesling and the Gruner, and then the Cabernet Franc. So what I've pulled up here is I've got a little bit of a timeline that, I guess we'll take a walk down, memory lane, or a little bit of a history. But this is not only from our family's perspective, but encompasses some, really important waypoints in the Pennsylvania industry along the way. So my father was born in Calabria in southern Italy in 1950. My grandfather moved the family here in the mid-50s. So originally they moved to Long Island, lived there for a number of years. And this is back when Long Island was known for potatoes, not for the wine industry that is there now. And a number of years later, some family had already been located here along Lake Erie in a town called Harbor Creek. So one town west of where we call home now, in a town called Northeast Pennsylvania. And no, Marty was not wrong. We are in the northwest part of the state. And yes, the name of the town is Northeast. And yes, it is confusing. We're not north of Scranton. So in my grandfather relocated the family to Lake Erie here, to Harbor Creek, and they purchased a small farm, which was dubbed at that time. My father and my uncle Frank were, taking care of the vineyard, actually even growing up through high school. It was while they were actually just out of high school in the late 60s. Is when things kind of reestablished the Pennsylvania wine industry. The industry itself was reborn, I guess, after the Limited Winery Act of the late 1960s. Probably many of you on the call know Doug Moorhead of Presque Isle Wine Cellars. He was one of the individuals that was instrumental in this legislation. Presque Isle Wine Cellars was actually the second winery established in Pennsylvania. I think Penn Shore Vineyards beat them by a day when that legislation came to pass in the late 60s. That said, it was really about solving a problem at that point. There were grape growers that needed a market for their fruit, and there were challenges with some of the markets in neighboring states, New York in particular. And so what they did is they allowed for wineries to establish, and it was really about trying to drive a market for a value-added product at that point, wine from Pennsylvania agriculture. So it's always been rooted. Our industry has always been rooted in the Pennsylvania agriculture, and we really we value those relationships still to this day, as I think the vast majority of the Pennsylvania wine industry does. So that was in the late 60s. Mazza was actually established in 1972. So Mazza Vineyards was established by, as I said, my father, Bob, and my uncle, Frank. They were both still in college. They had an interest in, as the story is told, my father was interested in going to business for himself. I think my uncle was the one that was really interested in the winemaking side of things. And they started the business. They had support from my grandfather as well along the way. And we were the sixth winery established in Pennsylvania at that time, so still very early days. Early on, we got off with a great start thanks to some connections through Herman Wiemer of Herman Wiemer Vineyards in the Finger Lakes, we were able to connect with the Geisenheim School in Germany, well-known school for enology. And our first winemaker actually was a Geisenheim enology graduate, top of his class, Helmut Kranick. He came over in the early 70s and was with us for a number of years in the 70s as our first winemaker that helped us get started. So that was actually a really great point to the fact that, while we're of Italian heritage, the wine styles often in this region are reminiscent of Germanic styles. The growing region's probably a little bit more approximate to those and some of those in Germany. And so we started off, wide range of wines, but, Germanic whites, Riesling being things that we started off well with, thanks to the help of Helmut. So actually in the bottom right there, you've got a picture of Helmut, and then our longtime winemaker, Gary Mosier, who trained under him in the early 70s and then carried on. Actually, I had the pleasure of working with Gary in the mid 2000s until his passing. I was actually kind of anecdotally, or just a side story, a few years ago, Helmut brought a group of German viticulturists and enologists, winery owners, vignerons, back to the U.S. They go, pre-COVID times, if everybody can remember those. They would have alumni trips around the world, somewhere to a wine region. So a few years ago, they came back to this part of the world, and they traveled between here and the Finger Lakes in Ontario. And we had the pleasure of having them for a whole day. We toured them across two of our facilities, had lunch with them. And what was really fantastic was we were able to open, on the 45th anniversary. So this is in 2018, we opened a bottle of 1973 Traminer that Helmut had made. And it was really fantastic to be able to share that wine with him that he had made 4.5 decades earlier. So kind of taking a little bit of a break here, for those that haven't already started, I'd encourage you to break out the bubbly. And we'll just take a minute to talk a little bit about the wine, one of the first wines that we have here. So one of the things I should say first is you'll notice the name Mazza isn't on the label. It's under a South Shore Wine Company. And so we actually have multiple brands, multiple locations in 2 different states, Pennsylvania and New York. The South Shore Wine Company is an operation, and I'll touch on this here a little bit more in a moment, but in the early or mid 2000s, I should say, about 2006, we acquired a property that had and housed the original winery in Erie County, the South Shore Wine Company, that was established in the 1860s. So we were fortunate enough to purchase this building. It was in need of a lot of rehabilitation, and that's putting it mildly. But we were able to also acquire that brand. And so this is one of the brands that we have. It has its own unique atmosphere. It's got a beautiful Civil War era stone cavern, which is extremely unique, in the Eastern U.S., in the U.S. in general. But beautiful facility, beautiful operation that we're able to restore. And this operation houses a portfolio of wines, including our sparkling portfolio. So we actually make a range of 6 different sparklings in this house. We do 3 traditional method wines. We do a couple pet nats, petulant natural, and then we also do more of a Prosecco style carbonated variation as well. So the sparkling Riesling we included today is a traditional method wine. But with a variety that maybe isn't, what often is equated with champagne. It's not Pinot Noir, it's not Chardonnay, it's not Pinot Meunier. But we think it makes a fantastic variation of a sparkler, much more acid driven in a lot of ways. This fruit is coming from Moorhead Farms. It's Riesling Clone 90, grown on four-arm Niffen trellising system. The Moorhead there is John and Cindy and Mike Moorhead, and probably many on the call or on the chat or on the video today here probably are familiar with Doug Moorhead of Presque Wine Cellars. This is his cousin, and John and Cindy are they were the first to really pioneer vinifera wine growing in Lake Erie here, contemporaries of Dr. Constantine Frank in the Finger Lakes, and just phenomenal people. It's really great to be able to taste some of their wines. And you know, a little bit with a heavy heart that I say that, with John unfortunately passing yesterday. He was a great friend and a great asset to the industry here. So there's somebody asking about forearm Niffen. The trellising system. So if anyone's familiar with VSP, vertical shoot positioning, you have a trunk that goes up and a cordons that go out, and you have, you know, your shoots are vertically positioned. Essentially what you have with forearm Niffen is there's 4 arms. So cordons going out on 2 wires. So basically there's 4 sets, or I'm sorry, 2 sets. So 4 total arms that are trellised out. So it's a way of dividing the canopy for slightly more vigorous sites. Does well with a number of varieties, and Riesling on their farm has taken, you know, and done very well with it. They have a couple different blocks of Riesling, all trellised in this manner. So we picked this intentionally a little earlier. We want to retain the acidity in that sparkling wine. So this is intentionally harvested for sparkling base. When we do that, we're again pressing very gently, taking that pressing, that harder fraction, and that's diverted off. So we want to keep the crisp, clean, acid-driven base wine that will then later go through tirage. So tirage is the addition of that little bit more sugar and secondary yeast culture at the point of bottling, so that we can get that secondary ferment occur in the bottle. We'll move those into a space, into a warehouse, let those ferment. This wine took probably about 3 to 4 months to go through that secondary fermentation to reach dryness again, and full carbonation. At that point, we started the riddling process. We don't intentionally leave the wine on lees for very long. So for those that are familiar with sparklings and champagne or cava or other variations, there are wines that will be lees aged for a period of time. You get that autolysis, and you get those yeasty, bready, rich secondary characters. We really want the fruit to drive this wine, so we keep it on yeast lees for you know, a shorter period of time prior to disgorging. Blaine, is there anything you know, else that maybe you want to interject about the wine, the style? Any questions from anyone else?
I mean, I really like the Riesling expression in this method. It's so mouth-watering, and it really is great for across a lot of applications. Great with a soft cheese or appetizer, or I remember when it first came out and I tasted the first bottle. I was having a spicy ramen for dinner, and it just fell into a perfect pairing. So I think it's a little bit different for the traditional method, being a Riesling, but it really it shows very well in the glass. I think it's fantastic.
And Mario, where did you say the facility is where they make the sparkling wines?
So these sparklings are all made here at Mazza Vineyards, but we have a second. We have another operation that's just 2 miles down the road here, just north of the town of Northeast, and that's the South Shore Wine Company. So that operation is no longer an operational winery, but it's a tasting room, a banquet facility, event facility. Again, pre-COVID times when you could have those things. But that is the branding. So we make a separate brand of wines under the South Shore Wine Company name, that original name, that original brand. And they're unique to that operation.
So the crest on the wine label is actually the wine cave itself, right?
Yeah, that's actually it's actually the soldier's course. So I don't know if I have a photo in here, but there's a larger cavern that enters into a back room that was a cellar and an intermediate cellar, all stone, and that passageway between the two. You know, in Pennsylvania, we're in the Keystone State. So you often, you know, envision the top of that arch would be a keystone. An alternate way of forming that passageway is basically just a series of rocks all stood upright across that arch, no actual keystone. They call it, and that's actually what that emblem is it's representing that soldier's course that transitions from the main cavern to what now is the tasting room at the South Shore Wine Company.
Thank you.
All right. So moving into and I can see that actually my parents are on here, so I guess I have to be honest to the truth. Otherwise, they'll probably chime in and correct me. So we're happy to have them on as well. It's where you do the embarrassing thing. Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad. So my parents met shortly after my father started the operation. I met at a wine tasting, as fitting as that is. And she was still crazy enough to think that it was worth sticking around. So it's a good test and a good pass. So carried on, and we've got some, other history along the way. There is an incriminating photo of child labor of my sister and I here, I believe, at one point. My uncle Frank, who previously served as president, as well as my father had with the Pennsylvania Winery Association, and some other things along the way in the 80s, with regards, and that association had done a lot of things to help further the Pennsylvania industry. A lot of the things that we take for granted, I guess, with regards to what can be done in PA, were hard fought by a lot of industry members over a lot of years. And really help to continue to push the industry forward. A lot of those through that initiative. Happened to a little bit of a neat historical point when they remade the Brig Niagara from the War of 1812 here. The flagship of Erie, Pennsylvania, was one of our bottles of wine that was fortunate enough to be chosen to christen that ship. And moving on, give my father kind of a nod for being a trailblazer in a lot of ways. For a lot of years, wine, oddly enough, was never considered an agricultural product in Pennsylvania. He worked hard to change that notion, and in the late 90s was appointed to the Farm Show Commission. And it's nice that now for a number of years, Pennsylvania recognizes that wine is an agricultural good. We're tied to the soil, to the viticulture within the state. All right, so the interlude here for the second wine is Gruner Veltliner, again from the South Shore Wine Company brand. And this is a 2017 vintage. Probably many on the chat today recognize Gruner as an Austrian variety, originally most notably grown in Austria, gaining notoriety, I think, in a lot of other regions around the world now. Some of the first Gruner that we harvested was in 2012. And we now have several growers that we work with growing Gruner. I think it's found a great home here along Lake Erie, and actually also in other areas of Pennsylvania. There's some other great producers of Gruners in Pennsylvania. It's a variety, I think, that is really fun to work with from a winemaking standpoint. And it's just a fantastically food-friendly wine. This wine comes off of actually two different vineyards in this instance. Again, Moorhead Farms here along Lake Erie. And there's also a component from Faro Vineyards in central Pennsylvania. So Chuck and Deneen Zaleski and their son Nick as well is in the operation. And they do a phenomenal job having come into the industry a while ago, actually, on the viticulture side, growing some fantastic fruit, and then with their own winery as well. So we're fortunate enough to work with them for some fruit, and this is included in that. Both those vineyards, those vines are all VSP trained. Gruner's an interesting beast viticulturally. It will, if you let it, just overcrop itself like crazy. So you have to be really mindful as the grower, and spend time working with our growers, out in the fields in the spring, in the summer, and of course during harvest, trying to pick the best times to pick fruit to make the best possible wines. That said, Gruner is really about finding the balancing act to achieve, the best possible fruit. It does want to to crop heavy. It's also got a really unique ripening window. You have to be just paying attention because the flavor just kind of comes on suddenly. And if you leave it too long, there's definitely an evolution of that fruit into a riper characteristic. But going out, there's a point where we're measuring sugar levels. So bricks, we're measuring acidity and paying attention to that and pH. But berry sensory analysis, so walking down the rows, and we have kind of a scoring mechanism we use internally for berry and flavor evaluation, is really important with a lot of varieties, but Gruner in particular. You'll really taste that character coming on at some point, and getting that pick point right is really important. We've played with letting a component of blocks hang longer and later to see what happened as we learn with the variety. I feel in some ways we're still learning how to work with Gruner almost 10 years in, and I think that's just the general nature of winemaking. We only get to do it once a year. So when you kind of look back at harvest, we look back a few months ago and winemaking team here says, okay, well, we need to do that different next year. It's a slow iteration. We don't get to try it again tomorrow or next week or next month. It's a whole nother year till we get to make that attempt. But I guess that's why it's so important that we do everything we can at harvest to maximize fruit quality. We always jokingly say, our goal on the winemaking side is basically don't screw up what Mother Nature gave us. So working with the growers to achieve the best possible fruit in the vineyard, and really trying to avoid, losing anything in the winery. It's just about preserving that. I don't come from a winemaking philosophy of, we're the ones that work the magic. I think a lot of the hard work is done by Mother Nature and by the grower, and making sure that we are aware of what the conditions are in the vineyard and work with our grower, make sure our grower knows what we're trying to achieve in the winery. And when we have that alignment and understanding is when we achieve the best results we've found over the years.
Mario, do you have any outlets down here, or is mail order the best way to get a hold of your product?
Yeah, so there's a couple options. So online shipping, ordering through our website, enjoymazza.com, is a great option. A number of our wines are available through the PLCB, the Fine Wine and Good Spirits stores. The Gruner is available in a limited number of stores. Unfortunately, the Riesling or the Cab Franc today are not listed, but the Gruner is. So that may be one that you might also be able to get through your local Fine Wine and Spirits store, Good Spirits store. You can look it up on the website there as well.
Do you have any of the pet nat? I think you said you have 2 pet nats. Are either of those listed?
Those are not listed, but they are available for shipping. And yeah, we do two pet nats. One of them is actually what's really interesting, and I guess Blaine and I, we could have done a bunch of interesting variations, but we use some of the same Riesling for a pet nat variation as well. So we picked that block and we diverted some to a pet nat and some to the traditional method. So there's a pet nat Riesling, and then there's also a Chambourcin Rosé pet nat. So if you're interested in that style, really would encourage you to do that. And I apologize to who I couldn't ship to in California. We didn't have that licensing in place, and brought it to my compliance coordinator, and we're going to be hopefully implementing that. Unsurprisingly, California has a lot of hoops to jump through. So sorry, and hopefully for the next time we'll be able to ship out there.
Would you like to tell everybody what a pet nat is?
Yeah, pet nat. So short for petulant natural. Essentially, it's the also referred to often as method ancestral. It's the precursor, I guess, to traditional method sparklings. I guess maybe I'll call it the lazy man sparkling. Kind of similar. You let the wine go through the secondary fermentation, or actually let it continue on fermentation in the bottle to achieve the natural carbonation. And rather than disgorging it and getting the yeast out like we would do with the traditional method, you just leave it in there and it's done. So you have that natural evolution of that autolysis. So that wine's going to change, over time, over holding it. All wine does, but even more so to a degree. And just like traditional method wines that are bottle fermented, they're still going to have, potential bottle to bottle variation even. So they're, a very unique wine. They develop some really neat and interesting character. I jokingly say, the brewing industry, I guess, stole the idea of, the hazy New England IPA from the wine world. They're doing it, ages and ages before.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sure. So, jumping up into, I guess, what we'll call, a little bit more modern times, a couple other interesting waypoints along the industry history. My father, give him, and I'm not doing this just because I know he's listening on the call, but he was really responsible for helping establish what is known as the Pennsylvania Wine Marketing and Research Program, or Research Board. And that was basically a mechanism established through the Department of Agriculture in the early 2000s to allow the industry to self-assess and use those funds to support research and marketing efforts. So marketing of Pennsylvania wines and research both in enology and viticulture. And that program has grown significantly, and now we're able to support a wide array of programs. So that's helped, move the industry forward. And we continue to evolve as a Pennsylvania industry. There's a lot of work to be done. We've got a lot of, great competitors, I guess, nearby in terms of, New York and Virginia and Maryland and Ohio and Michigan that are doing wonderful things with their industries as well. And I like to think of it, it's a little bit of healthy competition for us all to, move in the right direction of creating some great wines in the East Coast.
Mario, is the picture on this graphic, the picture of the wine cave, is that the one of which you spoke?
It is. Yeah, that's the South Shore Wine Company. So, in the mid 2000s, go back one, is when we acquired that. So we acquired that in 06 and opened it in 07. It was around about that time that I had gone off to study winemaking and enology. So I was really fortunate. I was never forced back into the business. I decided to actually come back into it. Originally a chemical engineer, or as one of my friends jokes, a recovering engineer. So I decided to come back into the business. I talked to my father about it, and his advice was pretty poignant. He said, okay, that's great. Go study somewhere and make mistakes with someone else's money first. So I did. I'd like to think I didn't make too many mistakes, but I went to the University of Adelaide in South Australia at that time, studied winemaking, and got my master's in enology. Was fortunate enough to work in the Barossa Valley and the Adelaide Hills to gain some experience. Actually, the most important thing I did down there was meet a girl that became my wife. And somehow I crazily enough convinced her to come back to Lake Erie from Australia. And she's still married to me, so it's a mystery. It's probably the eighth wonder of the world. So, joined back and came back, and, it's been a lot of fun since coming back. My father's given me a lot of opportunities to help grow, and we diversified the business at that point. We opened up a operation in Western New York. We added a distillery at that time, before I think anybody knew that the craft spirits, boom was going to be such a thing. We were the fourth distillery in New York. There's 120 plus now. I think we're, within the first 100 craft distilleries started in the US, there's nearly 2,000 now. So it was really an interesting time. And we, as I mentioned earlier, the South Shore Wine Company, it was actually interesting. The building itself was foreclosed on by the bank, and the outside was run down. It used to be an inn in its heyday, and a bed and breakfast and a restaurant. At that point, the bank had owned it for a number of years. It was pretty derelict. There were probably some squatters there. And my father said to me, "Hey, do you want to go take a look at this?" And I said, "Why?" And the cavern is why. He knew about the cavern. Nobody had really been successful in doing anything with it. It had been unused since Prohibition, when the winery stopped operation. So went down and looked at it, and it's just a phenomenal asset. Trust me, it did not look this nice when we got it. and it took a lot of work and restoration, but that was really the really an exciting gem to basically be able to recover. I don't know if my mother will remember or not, but we did that without telling her, because I think she would have screamed, no, 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 you guys are nuts. We're really happy that we're able to bring it back and have it maintained as a community asset. It's a really neat operation, and people don't expect it. When you walk in, it's very unassuming from the outside that you're going to walk into that cavern.
Really a nice touch. And your family had a lot of foresight. You got in on the ground floor of the wine business in Pennsylvania. You were number 6. And what did you say in New York? You were the 4th distillery.
Yeah, we really, when we started that, and that was really, my father was the one that said, well, let's do something. We were starting a winery operation there. At that point, actually, he had for a number of years, he had owned Penn Shore Vineyards, which was the first licensed winery. He acquired it in, I want to say the 90s. I don't know if he's going to nod in the background or shake his head. It was the late 80s, early 90s. He acquired that. Sold it just after 2000. And at that point, when I decided to come back into the business, we decided to start an operation in New York. And part of that was because Marty was asking me before the call, why didn't we start the distillery in Pennsylvania? There were some things in New York that you could do at that time, and a limited distillery in Pennsylvania didn't exist yet. You could start a distillery, but you only had a wholesale operation. You couldn't do a retail operation. So we jumped over the border into New York and added an operation there. Not realizing, we started doing some eau de vie and grappa. It was just very much to make a point of differentiation. We had no idea that the distillery would grow into what it is today. That said, our first operation was in Mayville, New York. We opened in 2006. 7 years later, we opened a new facility and have added on 4 times to that facility in Westfield, New York. That's pictured a little further next to that cavern there. It's a picture of the still house at our location on an 80-acre farm in Westfield, New York. So that's when we kind of delved into whiskey production, rye and bourbon, and a whole range of other things. Including a really neat partnership with Timberfish Technologies in terms of a sustainable twist of where we take, on that side of operations, spent grain and byproduct and use it for farm raising fish rather than, just disposing of that waste.
So I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. Go ahead, Marty.
I just was reading the graphic, and it said that it included things you were making, including spirits for fortified wines. Are you making fortified wines in either New York or Pennsylvania?
We are. We make a few fortified wines. So we do at Mazza Vineyards, we do a cream sherry and a port that is more of a tawny style. We actually are still able to call them sherry and port because we got those labels approved long enough ago that the exclusion with the TTB doesn't allow. But we have 2 other products that we refer to as Forte, so for strong, one at South Shore Wine Company, one at Mazza Chautauqua Cellars in New York. And those are ruby style ports that are made with one with Chambourcin, one with Cabernet Franc, both with spirit, grape brandy made in our own distillery. So what's neat is we have our control of our own distillate that go into those, and we're aging those in used whiskey barrels. And so there's this neat, kind of little sub-universe that we share barrels and flavors and components between wine and beer and spirits now that we do all 3. That is a really neat palette of flavors and experimentation for the production team. So the winemaking team, the distilling team, the brewery team. It's really neat to be able to kind of, internally collaborate on products and flavors that, otherwise, brewers, get wine barrels or beer barrels and vice versa. For us, it's great because it's, you just call up one of the other team members and they're still wet, they're still flavorful. We're just maximizing that impact, and it's really, I think part of our, really an integral part of our story now is some of the products that we make that are those shared expressions. Unfortunately, I'm telling you about those, and I don't have anything like that to pour today.
Next time.
Yeah. So I don't know if there's any questions about the first two wines.
I do have a question about Timberfish Technologies. What is that?
Yeah, so this is on the, we'll take a little bit of a tangent away from the wine side, but so the facility in New York, the second one, our second operation there, our current operation was purpose built, really with the focus on the brewery and distillery. The winery exists there as well, the New York operation, but the real highlight or real focus was on the brewing and spirits. And we recognized, in those processes, you generate spent grain, stillage, byproduct. It's really, really something you have to deal with. You have to either pay to haul it away, or, traditionally, if you look at ledgers in Kentucky, you'd see, hogs raised, so you might go feed cattle or hogs with it. We were able to partner with a Westfield native that had developed a really innovative and actually patented technology where we take that, and you can kind of see it in the bottom right there, a photo. That material is basically sent down. It's digested in a system that basically turns it into microbes digest that with wood chips and the spent grain. And basically growing those microbes allows us to grow invertebrate, things like worms, snails, larvae, etc. And so now you have a nutrient source that you can farm raise fish on. We've actually demoed the system to raise freshwater shrimp as well. A couple of years ago, did a pilot. So this is kind of an R&D facility to demonstrate the technology, and with the hopes of making larger commercial installations of these. Really to basically make better use of what we would have previously referred to as a waste stream. We're now creating a value added stream from our byproducts. So generating, a clean water stream out of the process, as well as a food stream. It's sustainable. What's wonderful about it is, fisheries are overfished. So it gives us the opportunity to grow something that, doesn't have any heavy mantle contamination or any of those other things you have to be concerned with now as well. So not only the sustainability, but just from a quality standpoint, you're talking about a really neat proposition.
Excellent. So back to the sustainability issue. That's great.
Yeah, so we're really fortunate. Jerry Northrup is he's the brains behind that operation. He's the one that developed the technology over a couple decades, and we're really proud to be partnered with them. And again, continues to develop that. I think a couple more patents actually recently came through on the technology, so there's over 4 now on it. And we're really hopeful to be able to be a part of moving that forward to wider adoption. We'd love to see installations in other places. It's really neat, versatile technology. You can kind of install it wherever. You could run it on. You could run it doing salt water. You could grow warmer water fish in warmer climates. You can grow cold water fish in our climate. What's neat about it is it's very versatile and adaptable to whatever to whatever installation you make.
Okay.
All right, and so the third wine we've got here is a 2018 Cabernet Franc, and so this is from the Mazza Vineyards portfolio. What's neat about this fruit is it's from the Zielinski brothers farm. So Zielinskis are it's a multi-generational family farm going back a few generations at least, and I'm going to get probably the number of generations wrong, but their family had been growing grapes in this area for a great many years, and predominantly had been growing grapes for the juice industry, so Concords for Welch's. It was only about 12 or 13 years ago that Albert and Marty, who were about my age in their late 30s, early 40s, they decided to diversify part of the farm into for winemaking, so some hybrid varieties and vinifera. So they are growing a few different varieties, including Traminette, Vignole, but they grow some fantastic Cabernet Franc, Riesling. We also have a block of Pinot Noir for sparkling base on that farm. And they identified, the best possible patch of land on their farm and decided to really go all into vinifera grape growing with it. And they've done a fantastic job. So they've had some challenges along the way with the polar vortex in the winters of 13-14 and again in 14-15. This vineyard got knocked back and had to be reestablished. So they lost some crop years there. But they've stuck with it and grow some fantastic fruit. So it's fully VSP trained. They really subscribe to full fruit exposure. Some really warm, sunny climates, you have to worry about sunburn. Marty, you lived here in Erie for a little while, so you probably know that, that's probably not a risk up here. We don't get that much sun. So we get some great fruit off of that. This fruit is consistently, ripening to 23 to 24 bricks, which, anyone knows viticulture in this part of the world, that's phenomenal. We treat it when we come into the winery. We, as we do any of our premium reds, we destem, but we don't crush. So we just separate the berries from the stalks. We really want to avoid beating it up. VSP, what is VSP? Vertical shoot positioning. So basically you have the trellis wire, the cordons run out, and you have all of your shoots are pointing straight upright. And that basically means you have a nice exposed fruiting zone. So all the grapes are hanging in this one just beautiful little patch where you can pull leaves off and you just see this fruit zone and then just nice leaf area for ripening right above it, all standing up straight. Looks like a beautiful manicured garden. It's really gorgeous, and they do a wonderful job of maintaining that vineyard. And so when it comes in machine harvested, but then we're and they actually have two wonderful Gregoire harvesters that are fantastic, gentle on the vine, gentles on the fruit. We destem only, we don't crush the fruit. We do something called pneumatage. It's a fancy take on a French word for how we manage our caps. So when you're fermenting red wine, no, it's not the days of Lucy where everybody's stomping on the grapes anymore, unfortunately. What we do to manage that cap, so as you're fermenting those red grapes, the yeast, they're eating the sugar, they're producing alcohol, carbon dioxide, and that CO2 pushes that cap up, just like your bread rises when you make bread. When we want to mix that in, that's where you extract the color and flavor from the skin. So we use a method called pneumatage that basically puts a large air bubble pulse in there, and that mixes that cap. It distributes the heat that's generated in there, but in a gentle fashion. So it's actually a really interesting technology that we adopted probably going about back a dozen years or so ago. And we use that for a lot of our red wine ferments. I'm a big fan of it. It works great with the varieties and styles we're working with, here in a cooler climate growing region. What we're using is D254 for this, and we do a co-inoculation with a malolactic culture VP41. Really want to make sure that our mallows go through cleanly. And this wine is moved all into French oak. So it's entirely French oak age, combination of some new and used puncheons. So puncheons are 500 liter barrels. So they're a little over twice the size of your normal 225 liter barrique. And so we have a mix of new and used French oaken, either Mercier or Tonnier O. The secondary or the other cooperage is second and third fill barriques, including the likes of Taranso and a few others. Really want to balance that out. So I don't like to use too much new oak in any of our red portfolio, in any of our wines. Really, it just overpowers it. Wine, when I worked with wine in the Barossa Valley and big, bold Australian Shiraz, they can stand up to that new oak. Our wines are a little more restrained. We want to really make sure to allow it to integrate. And we don't want to dominate that fruit, otherwise it overpowers it. So two ways we do that is we use the second and third fill barriques, but the puncheons allow us to do that with some new oak. But because they're a larger barrel, you get less surface area to volume ratio, which means that we get some of that new oak impact, but we don't get the intensity as well. So it's a really wonderful tool for us. I just like them because they're a big, cool barrel, and they just look neat. And allows us to do some really cool things. Like, for instance, we had some Chardonnay that we did Surlies for about 8 months and emptied them and sent them over. And we have rye whiskey and bourbon whiskey aging in them now at the distillery. So And all of the reds in our portfolio, we tend to aiming for at least 18 months in oak, sometimes up to 22 to 24 months. Really, again, from my perspective, is I think sometimes on the East Coast we've run into reds that are often aged not long enough, and it's tough to say, oh, I'm going to hold it for an extra year and not sell it. While I let it age. But we really find that that's important to let those wines mellow, soften, and integrate in order to achieve the highest quality. And I think red winemaking, red wine growing in this part of the world is not easy. You can't do it in every site. We don't have copious amounts of sunlight like some parts of the world, or the left coast and the west coast. But we're also fortunate, we have water, sometimes too much, and we don't have smoke taint and other things to have to deal with. So it's a unique set of challenges, but we're fortunate that we have some really great vineyard sites that are being identified, and some folks in our industry that are excited about helping push that wine quality forward through innovating. I'm meeting with Albert and Marty this coming week. I'm hoping to convince them to plant more Cabernet Franc in this block, because we're really fortunate. The winemaking team, we tasted a bottle of 16, 17. We were tasting the 18 to blend. We tasted the 19 in barrel, and we're just really, really excited about the consistency and ability of that fruit to grow on that block. And we really just want to double down and get some more of it, planted at that block, hopefully.
So Mario, you mentioned sunlight and so forth, and it got me thinking about the old days when I lived up there, and I remember the cloud cover and the humidity that resulted from it. And I'm wondering what kind of issues that humidity creates for your vineyard management.
Yeah, so I mean, it's a huge challenge. So you've got disease pressure and disease pressure and disease pressure. So that's the big driver, is that humidity, that wetness with rain, that creates some real challenges from a disease pressure standpoint. Now, different varieties are more or less susceptible to that. So something like the Cabernet Franc actually is a pretty robust variety. It's it's not prone to botrytis like Merlot might be. It's got a little bit thicker skin like its compatriot Cabernet Sauvignon. Ripens a little earlier though than Sauvignon, so suited for the region. Key is having that key is to have that open canopy, that open fruiting zone, to allow that to dry out. So if you do have wet, you do have humidity, if you don't have all the leaves shading that fruit, the fruit gets the sunlight, which is helpful for color and tannin development, but it also means that you don't have the extended wetting period. So after a rain event or a wetting period or humidity, with that fruit being open, that airflow and those on and offshore breezes that we get from the thermals off the lake allows that fruit to dry out. It's really important with varieties like Riesling and others that are going to be more susceptible to disease. Pinot Gris is a great example. It's tight cluster, thinner skinned. You got to be maniacal about maintaining that. The Franc is a little more resilient. The Gruner, it comes on early enough in terms of ripening, but still is also susceptible to a degree. So again, that VSP trellising helps with that leaf pulling to help make sure that fruit's exposed. So that's really how we combat that. But a rigorous spray program, utilizing a rotational spray program is really important to disease manage for us in this part of the world. There's a lot of sprays, whereas drier regions, you might have a few. We have many more than that, but it's just not tenable to be able to grow certain varieties in this climate without that. Unfortunately, we really have to be quite vigilant in the vineyard in that regard.
So somewhere in our conversation today, the name Dr. Frank came up, and I'm wondering, since you are in a colder climate up there, do you ever experiment growing any of the varieties that he brought to this country, like Separavi or Arquetzatelli?
We are. So the Moorheads are actually some that they've trialed so many different things on their farm over the years, and so there's probably, I think, 23 different varieties on that farm, and We probably buy just about all of those. A portion of the fruit also goes to Presque Isle wine cellars. We actually do have some Separavi planted with Moorheads. So that is coming. We've got, the Gruner is something that we've delved into. And as I said, our first vintage was 2012. In 2016, we took our first harvest of Teraldigo in. So not necessarily brought over by Dr. Franks, but we've been experimenting with that. We think that has potential. More recently, we started working with a vinifera hybrid that was developed in Germany years ago called Regent, Regent. I'm excited by it. It's a great blending component for some wines, but we actually did 1 ton that we did as an Apassamento harvest. And so we have just 2 barrels, be about 500 bottles if we're lucky, that we have that is aging right now. And we're really excited about the potential for that. We also have a few trials in barrel right now. We did about 3 or 4 different treatments, the winemaking team this year with Regent for a varietal release. It's new. We've only worked with it for a couple of years now, but we're quite excited by that. We've got 2 growers working with that variety now. So it's aligning with some of the varieties that are more well established in the region, things like Riesling that we know do well here, but also starting to explore some other alternatives that, maybe won't ever be as well known as something like Chardonnay, but if they do well here and they make great wine here, we really believe that they can be, a great asset. And if you can get, if you get them into people's glasses and get them to try it, I think you really change some minds.
Absolutely. So do you want to speak to? Does anybody out there want to? I see a bunch of comments here, and perhaps Mario, you might want to comment on some of this material here. The Gruner Veltliner, for instance, some comments about how it shines at higher temperatures after leaving it out of the refrigerator for about 90 minutes. And I personally didn't chill mine. I like to drink most of my whites at room temperature anyway, and I think I get more out of them that way in terms of aromas and stuff. But do you want to comment on any of that stuff?
Yeah, I would say, and I think absolutely for this Gruner, it's evolved in bottle a little bit, and this is a really interesting wine. This 17 is just, I love the wine. It's now taking on some neat developed characteristics. It makes total sense that a little bit of breathing makes sense. The reason that is I'll make a plug here. So you all notice it was under Stelvin screw cap. 15 years ago, it felt like it was battling to get people to not think this was cheap wine, Boone's Farm, Mad Dog 2020. So I happened to be working in the Australian industry when, the closure studies and, the revolution, or at least what I'll say, at least in my mind, was the revolution around closures came around. The Australians and New Zealanders recognized that aromatic whites do wonderful under this closure. In the US, it took us a while, but I remember there was a conversation at some point in like 03, 04. My father said, "Oh, we're going to buy a new bottling line." I wasn't at the time. I said, "Get Stelvin," and he did, and they did, and we got one of the first Stelvin bottling lines on the eastern US actually back in 2004 or so. And so, we were on the cutting edge of that, which also meant it took a lot of education of our consumers to understand why this was a good closure for the wine. Now, this one in particular actually has a uniqueness. So there's different liners in these things. So if you look inside your liner, this one is actually what they call sarin tin. So there's a thin tin film on that liner there, and that really keeps the oxygen ingress down. And that's the higher grade liner that we use on our premium aromatic whites. We use a liner that allows a little bit of oxygen transmission on some of the wines and some of the reds. That allows it to mature a little bit more proximate to cork. But given this wine has been under this closure, it absolutely makes sense that it needs a little bit more time to breathe. For those that are familiar with the lexicon, I come from the training in the Australian industry, so it's more of a reductive technique. So we like to keep oxygen out. We control that. We want to minimize that dissolved oxygen. We don't want those oxidized characters in the wine. We want to retain the freshness and fruitiness. This closure allows us to do that, but it also does mean that the wine sometimes after a bit of time in bottle needs a little bit to open up, but it also means it's going to be better preserved and not oxidized when you do that. So you'll notice that. And then I think on the Franc, yeah, absolutely. Open up a little bit of time to breathe. Again, on the, on the Franc, we did a bunch of variety and cork closure trials internally over the past 6, 7, 8 years. We're looking to switch cork vendors, and we did trials with about 4 different varieties, tasted them. We actually pulled out bottles that are going on 5 years now that we tasted with some of our original traditional cork, and then Diam microagglomerate, which is I think one of the gold standards in terms of closures out there, and we use Diam 5s, and these really are a great closure that really help our wines, I think, maximize their potential. But again, with reds, it's interesting. I think it's just always neat to see, does the wine open up or does it fall off with time? I'm sure plenty of people out of the call, there's some wines that maybe at a certain point of age, they're great, but then even just a couple, you decant them and then you taste a little bit a couple hours later, if you let it last that long, and you say, oh, the wine's fallen off, it might not be able to hold up. But I think that's just what's neat about wine, is it's this living thing that just evolves over time, and just even in your glass as you open it up. So I think that's what's neat about this whole thing, is, like I said, I come from an engineering background, but wine is just such an interesting aspect of, there's all these different facets. There's science, there's art, there's technology, there's business in it. It's a lot of fun.
All right. Is this the end of the program? I think it is.
Yeah, I'd say open it up for any other questions.
Is there one more slide? Is there one more slide before we take the slides down?
Yeah, I've just got the, I'll throw up there, if you have any questions for us, there's Blaine and I's contact information. We're happy to hear from anyone if you have questions along the way, and we'd love to have people come visit us. And I just threw up here, there's just a portfolio of the different brands that we have.
Okay. And let me see, is there a closing slide?
Yeah, this, and then I've got the one from you there, Marty.
All right, only because I wanted to mention, I wanted to thank you and Blaine and the rest of your family for everything you did to set this up for us today. And I also wanted to mention to everybody that they can visit our website at pawinesociety.org. And where you can find out more about, if you're not a member already, membership options, monetary donations, or to sign up for our e-newsletter. And also, if you have any other comments that you want to pass along to me separate and apart from this, send them to my email address at marty@bcme.net. And if you'll take the slides down now, we can open this up to open mic segment and let everybody have at it and ask you questions. Everybody can, if you want, unmute your microphones and.
Marty, can I just ask that nobody ask the one question of my father of how much truth I told there, because he might call me out on that.
All right.
Mario, this is Laura in Santa Fe, New Mexico. So I have 2 questions. One, can we buy another one of these triple combos at the same price extended to the PA Wine Society Club?
Oh, nice.
Yeah, Blaine, let's make sure that code stays active, but absolutely, we can leave it up and active for a bit.
That's great. Thank you. Appreciate that. But we noticed in drinking wines, from around the country or the world, that in Pennsylvania, it looks like all these wines are 12 or 12.5%. Is that a Pennsylvania state law to keep them down, or why are they slightly lower alcohol? Which I actually kind of like the lower alcohol. So thank you.
Yeah, so it's really driven by the viticulture. So in those warmer climates, you can get to the higher sugar levels that get you to that, it's kind of been that driving of, fruit bombs and big, rich, ripe reds, and that drives that higher alcohol. We're a cooler climate, so it's hard for us to get much above that, quite honestly. The highest we might get to is, potential alcohol of 13.5%. And so that's that cooler climate component, whereas we don't achieve the higher alcohols. But I'm a fan personally. I don't get me wrong. I love my big, I guess, maybe because I had such a great experience there, but I love my big Barossa Valley Shiraz. but I also like something that I can have a second and third glass of, enjoy, that's not too much of a, too heavy on the alcohol, and tends to be a little bit more food friendly. 16% red is sometimes not food friendly. You need something that's just a little more restrained.
Well, your wines are really quite excellent. We were a little skeptical with Pennsylvania. I even asked Marty, is this going to be a good wine or not? Because we visited a few of them in Pennsylvania and they're more sugary, bubbly, or I don't know what, but
Oh,
really,
no.
kudos. You guys are doing fabulous. I love it. It's wonderful. So
Thank you.
one last question. So I also like to drink cocktails and spirits. Do you guys have any
You can hear
packages
this.
of bottles we can get of spirits too? A discounted package that we could get mailed to us
Don't
in
say
New
anything.
Mexico?
Yeah, unfortunately, we're not shipping spirits out yet right now.
Oh, darn.
There's this funny little thing about 100 years ago called Prohibition that really threw that into a tizzy, and we haven't figured it out yet.
I have a question for Mario.
Sure.
When we first tasted the Gruner after the sparkling wine, the first experience was not good. And right
Because it only breathes for 5 minutes.
right. So Scott said breathing. It needs to breathe. Same thing with the Cabernet Franc. What's the correct breathing time for both wines?
Yeah, Blaine, I don't know if you want to weigh on this one too. I mean, with your experience for those, I think I will say one thing is it does change over time. The Gruner, when it was first put in bottle, probably didn't need much breathing time at all. Now it's had a little bit of time in bottle, so I think that's changed. So it needs to open up a little bit.
How much time did we have?
It got really good at 25 minutes.
Okay. Scott says really good at 25 minutes. So
Even better at 30.
you need to give this wine time. You don't want to make the decision right away that I don't like it. We're not real big Cabernet Franc fans, but we're giving it time. So how much time for the Cabernet Franc?
Blaine, I don't know if you have any thoughts here, but I'd say a half hour to an hour sometimes on that will probably help it open up a little bit.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
I said on the chat 30 minutes on both of them. They really started to open up. I think the Cab Franc, I'm noticing in this one, just as I'm drinking it here, that it's been open for 45 minutes or an hour now, and it's really reaching a nice spot. But I think a half hour on both of them is a pretty good time to breathe and to get ready to serve.
Okay. Thank you.
Anybody else
Great.
have any questions? Here's your chance.
You have any questions?
No.
Let me see. Lynn and Bill on the chat say decanting was worthwhile. Just popping the cork isn't the same. I agree with that. I think everybody will.
Yeah. Okay. What? That means you put it in another container.
Well,
Is there anything about the geology up there, particularly in terms of, do you get much minerality in any of your wines?
What's interesting, the geography here, the geology here, I can say varies actually. So what's interesting is because of the formation of the Great Lakes, thanks to glacial recession, means that there's different types of soil deposited in all different spots, and even some vineyards here will have multiple soil types. So we have guys that are on sandy loam, heavy clay soils to gravel. So really site selection is a big thing with viticulture. And for us, when we're in cooler climates, what we'll call a term more marginal sites, and you've got to pick the best ones. So that's the aspect, airflow and drainage, ensuring that you don't have tree lines nearby that are going to impact airflow or shading, to lose even an hour of sunlight inception during the day. And also, that soil selection that's going to be conducive for us. We find that better draining soils are going to do better for vinifera in this region because we do get a lot of rain. So being able to let the grapes dry their feet out is important.
Folks, if you're not addressing Mario, please keep your mic closed. Thanks. All right. Any other questions? Let me see here. Lynn says, thanks for the tips, gang. The Gruner has a wonderful crisp mouthfeel. And Cindy says she did not enjoy the Cab Franc at first, but maybe that's before she did. She gave it more time. Well, if we have no more questions, we'll wrap it up and let Mario and Blaine go enjoy the rest of their afternoon. Gentlemen, thank you so much. Thank you for making time for this. It's been certainly my pleasure, and I'm sure everyone else's pleasure to enjoy your fantastic wines. And we look forward to hearing more great things about your company as it develops further. And
thank you. Yeah, we really appreciate it. Thank you everyone for joining. Glad you got to hopefully enjoy some wines. It's a real pleasure. We appreciate the support as well.
All right. Take care. And I want to let everybody know that this Wednesday we'll have another episode of Wine Wednesday at 7 p.m. And this week we're urging everybody to bring a wine of their choice that is not one of the noble grapes. So if you look at the announcement we sent out, which had the 18 noble grapes that usually it's 6, but Wine Folly has expanded that. If you look at that list, don't come with one of those wines. Come with something totally different and unique. And we'll talk about those wines at that time.
Mario, nice job with that Cab Franc. I thought it was fantastic.
Thank you. Glad you enjoyed it.
All right. Take care, everybody. Good night.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Cheers. Cheers, everyone.